All right. So, yeah, like I mentioned, today we're talking single amp systems. It's an interesting topic for me. I like to keep things simple. I like simple systems. I think sometimes the more complicated you make some of these systems, honestly, it gets hard to make them sound great. The more components you add, I feel like the harder it is to dial those things in. Any of you that have done some of those bigger, more elaborate systems, you can probably relate to that. And, to me, I feel like they're harder to tune, they're harder to troubleshoot, they're harder to diagnose. Everything about them is harder. Of course, it's fun to put in multiple amplifiers and tons of speakers and all that stuff, but some of the best sounding systems I've personally ever had or heard or installed and sold were really simple, basic setups. And that's really what today is all about, is kind of the keep it simple method. So I'd love for you guys to chime in too. If you guys have anything to add, like I said, make sure to put it in that chat box on Zoom, or you can toss it on Facebook, and I'll do my best to keep up with that as well. Which reminds me, I should probably get my Facebook open here so I can try to keep up with you guys on there as well. And get that going. Cool. And here we go. Cool. So what is single amp systems all about? What's today's topic really all about? And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's all about designing simple, efficient systems with the least amount of components that still sound awesome. And I think this is a practical application. I think it's something that applies to a lot of everyday installs. It applies to a lot of everyday customers that come in. Most of the time, consumers do not come into your shop looking for elaborate systems with multiple amplifiers and all that stuff. Now, occasionally, sure, but on average, I think most people just want their car to sound better. Now, what does sound better really mean? What does that mean? That means something different to everyone. But I think to a lot of people, sound better means play louder, have more bass, have less distortion, and maybe even have some sort of sound staging or some sort of imaging or something like that, depending on the customer. And the cool thing is that all of that can really be achieved using small amounts of components, even a single amplifier or single system. So the other side of that, though, is really, why do we care? Why not just sell them multiple pieces? Why not do multiple amplifiers? Why not make it more elaborate? And there's a few good reasons for that, besides just the usual stuff. And so, with that, there's a lot of reasons why to care, but one of them is that a lot of these late model vehicles are starting to come with less elaborate or less sturdy electrical systems. They're starting to come with pretty basic, tiny alternators. Some of these import cars, which most of us drive, or a lot of us drive, a lot of Toyotas and Hondas and Hyundais and Mazdas and those things don't come with very big alternators or very robust electrical systems. The batteries and alternators have continually gotten smaller as the years have gone on. And so that's something to take into consideration. Can you strap down that system and put some big amplifier in there and just say, screw it and do it anyway? Sure, you can. But what are you doing to the life of that vehicle, that vehicle's alternator? What are you doing to the life of that electrical system? What type of strain are we putting on that system? And so that's definitely something to take into consideration. Another part of that is, hybrids and full electric vehicles are becoming really, really popular. Years ago, it was like, there was a small percentage that were hybrids and even smaller, tinier percentage that were electric. But now you're starting to see more and more Teslas on the road. You're starting to see more and more, Chevy Bolts and Volts and all these electric vehicles. And so consumption is certainly something to take into consideration. It's something to at least be aware of, where in the past, we didn't really care how much juice we were pulling. All we wanted to make sure was that, am I going to kill this car if I put in these amplifiers? And if the answer was no, we pretty much just did it, regardless of the size of the alternator. A lot of times that was just not a consideration. So that's something to definitely be aware of with today's vehicles. And as more and more manufacturers lean towards hybrid and electric vehicles, which is going to be the way everything goes, is what it's seeming like. Most of the manufacturers right now have committed to going at least hybrid, if not full electric, within the next 5 to 10 years. So this is going to be a topic that more and more people in our industry are going to have to care about, whether you want to or not. You're always going to have your holdouts. You're always going to have customers that refuse. You're always going to have customers that want to stick with, traditional combustion vehicles. And hey, I get it. I love driving a vehicle with a loud exhaust and a big engine and something fun to drive. But for commuting and daily practical life, electric vehicles and hybrids make a lot of sense. And as the cost of those comes down too, I think we're going to see more and more manufacturers and consumers kind of adopt that way. So the other thing to think about when selling these systems, and when, if you're somebody working in a shop or a tech or a sales guy, when customers come in, most of the time, they don't come in and ask for a huge elaborate system. How often do we hear as guys in this industry, I don't want anything fancy, or I'm not looking for a competition setup. Now, I know a bunch of you are cringing right now because those words make me cringe too. I hate hearing, I'm not looking for anything fancy. I hate the term, I don't need a competition system. Yeah, I know, dude. I know you didn't come in for a competition system. Like, I got it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to spend some money, right? So I don't want this to be misconstrued as that these have to be inexpensive systems, because that's not always the case. These could still be very high-end, high-quality setups, but that also doesn't mean they have to be super elaborate. So it's definitely something to just kind of keep in mind. And, really what they want is just to achieve those results. They don't really care most of the time how you get there. They just want you to produce the sound that they're hoping for. They want it to sound like their home theater system in their living room, or their sound bar, God forbid. They're looking for something better than that tinny sound that they hear right now. The other thing is space. Space is a huge consideration in a lot of these modern vehicles. As cars have gotten newer and there's more modules and more electronics and more, pieces to the puzzle, so to speak, there is less and less room in these vehicles. I feel like even in my own cars, as I've bought cars over the years, there's just less room under the seats. There's less room behind the trim panels. There's less room in the dash in a lot of vehicles. So as installers and as 12-volt guys, we are running out of places to put things. I'm sure a lot of you that are watching this have worked on a car before, where you just kind of go, I don't know where I'm going to fit this. I don't know where I'm going to fit this stuff. And if the gear has already been chosen and it's already been picked out and you're already past that step, it's tough sometimes to go back and say, hey, we need to switch to this because this will fit better. A lot of customers don't want to hear it. They've already chosen that product. They've already gone through all the sales process. And so at this point, it's kind of your job a lot of times to make it fit that car. And that's not always that easy to do. My car has almost no room under the front seats. There's pretty much no room behind any trim panels or behind any kick panel spaces. The dash has a little bit of space, but not much. And then, it's got a big trunk, but there's not a lot of space behind trim panels or anything like that. So there really wasn't a lot of places if I wanted to do a fully stealth system like most consumers are asking for. Most people just want everything hidden. They don't really want to see it. There's just not as much space as there used to be in a lot of these vehicles. So definitely something to keep in mind. So one of the other questions that normally comes up in these trainings is, well, why audio control? Why do I care? Why should I use your stuff? What's the point? I could get amplifiers from brand A, B, or C. Why should I use audio control? So before we dig in too much farther, I'll give you a couple of things that make us a little bit different. And one of those is just flexibility. Really, the flexibility with audio control products is unequaled. There is nothing else out there that does exactly what our products do, especially in one box and at that price. So there's definitely a value proposition that goes along with that. Oh, hey, my LEDs are falling down. Also, as far as support goes, industry-leading support before and after the install, and before and after the sale too. I mean, we have some incredible support at Audio Control as far as dealer support, tech support, online support. We have Facebook groups that are really pretty active. Some of us guys from Audio Control are in there. We have some great enthusiasts that help run those groups as well. So there's some great support, more so than probably almost any other brand, that really helps to get that done. And as a company, I feel like we really stand behind things a little bit more so than most other brands do. Not only do we have an awesome warranty that we'll talk about in a second, but we also help to support the products well after the fact. For example, we still put out software updates and firmware updates for products that were made or bought a few years ago. Most companies after a year or two have pretty much forgotten all about that stuff and kind of just moved on and, you know, are working on the next thing. We're still working on future products and always pushing forward, but we also care about the customer that bought something from us a couple years ago. We still care about that customer. We still want them to have the best experience possible. And if that means that we spend some time working on a firmware update or software update or something like that, then that's definitely what we're going to do. I just mentioned warranty a minute ago. We do have an incredible warranty, 5-year warranty across the board on all AudioControl products when they're installed by a authorized dealer. There's a few exceptions to that too. There are a few online e-tailers that you can purchase things from and still get that 5-year warranty as well. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, 5 years across the board, it's a hell of a commitment. I mean, it's really saying something that we stand behind those products more so than any other manufacturer. Nobody has a 5-year warranty out there on car audio products, and especially not on products that are going to see any sort of moisture, dust, dirt, vibration, like our ACX product line, like these ACX amplifiers like this. Even these have a 5-year warranty on them. And this is an amp that is made to get wet, get dirty, get muddy, get sandy, all that good stuff. And we're still going to stand behind that with a 5-year warranty. So pretty cool stuff. We are designed and engineered here in the US. AudioControl is a US company. We're based just north of Seattle in Mount Lake Terrace, Washington. That's where I am right now. And we do all of our own design work, all of our engineering work, all of that stuff happens right here. We do a lot of the assembly and testing, all of the testing, a lot of the actual manufacturing happens here. You know, I mean, there's people down the factory right now soldering components and building epicenters and building LC2Is and all that cool stuff. So it's a really cool facility to walk through. I'll have to do a tour sometime and give you guys a peek behind the curtains at how that all goes down. But it's pretty cool to actually walk down to the factory and see all of that stuff happen, unlike most companies that are just bringing stuff in from overseas. Now, that's not to say that we don't use any international parts, because we do. To build electronics these days, you pretty much have to get parts from overseas. That's just the way it goes. But the nice thing is we're not 100% reliant on overseas manufacturing like most other companies are. So we have our hands definitely more in the product, on the product, doing the testing, doing the assembly, doing the engineering and all that stuff than just about any other brand. We also, as far as ease of install with these products, I mean, there's really nothing else in my mind that can do quite what these do. Like I mentioned with flexibility, you know, when I start to compare us to other brands and I start doing, you know, like a competitive analysis, and I'm comparing our amps to another brand, and it's really interesting when you do apples to apples comparison, how many features and how many choices you have when you're looking at our products versus what else is out there. There's really not much you can't do with most of the AudioControl amplifiers, etc. Whereas most other companies just build just a straight up amplifier, really, really simple and straightforward. We just give you a whole lot more control and versatility and just things to make your life easy. We also offer a incredible value, you know, more power, more features, and just overall more value, more bang for the buck. Because with all of, say, our amplifiers, for example, you aren't having to buy a high to low converter and an amplifier. You're just having to buy an amplifier that has that high to low built in. You know, if you're looking at buying a, I don't know, a 2-channel amplifier or 4-channel amplifier, whatever it is, you know, you're going to find that all of our products have something like a LC2I or LC2I Pro, something like that, built inside of them, which is really pretty slick. You know, you're taking sometimes a $100, $150, $200 line output converter that you would normally buy separately, and now that's built into the amplifier. That makes a huge difference. Signal summing built in. You know, some of our products even have load generation built in. So I could go on and on about that stuff, but there is a ton of features and things that are built into these products just to make your life easier and offer your customers a better value. You're only having to sell one piece instead of having to grab 2, 3, 4 SKUs and pile them all on the counter. You're able to do it with just one piece. So with that, let's get into what kind of makes up a single amp system. And let's see here. Give me just 1 second here, guys. Cool. So the first thing I want to chat about was some of the smaller amplifiers, the micro amps, the ACM and ACX series micro amplifiers. These would be some of the smallest amplifiers that we make that could be used in a single amp system. So for example, if you're using something like an ACX 300.4, we have some awesome options to be able to use that as the entire system amplifier. Now, this is a 300 watt amp, as is our ACM series, which is the other amp you're seeing on your screen right now. The ACM stands for AudioControl Micro. ACM series amplifiers are basically a sound quality micro amp. That's the best way to think of them. You know, there's a ton of mini amplifiers and micro amplifiers and power sports amps and all that stuff. The market's flooded with tiny amplifiers. The thing to remember is that AudioControl didn't build small amplifiers because everybody else was making small amps. We built the ACM series amplifiers because we wanted to make a small amplifier that actually sounds good. We wanted to make a small amp that had real power levels that it actually delivered. We wanted to make a small amp with a high signal to noise ratio and built-in features and great stuff built into it. And that's what we did with the ACM lineup. So if you're not familiar with those, if you've never seen an ACM amp, they are tiny. They're not much bigger than like an LC2I. If you look at our ACM amplifiers, they're only a couple inches longer than an LC2I. And the cool thing is they basically all have an LC2I built inside. So if you're looking for just a small sub amp, our ACM 300.1, or excuse me, 1.300 is a awesome little mono amplifier with an LC2I built in. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about multi-channel systems and single amp systems. So if you were to use an ACM 400 or 4.300 or an ACX 300.4, like this piece here, you've got some cool options for building a system with that. So let's say that that's how you're going to do this setup. Let's say it's a small car. It's a Mazda Miata or a Honda S2000 or something like that. Now, the initial reaction is I got to have a 5-channel amp in order to do a single amp system. And that's not true. You can absolutely use a 4-channel amplifier. All of our 4-channel amplifiers from AudioControl can be bridged and ran as either a 2-channel or a 3-channel or 4-channel amplifier. So in this example, let's say it is a small car. Maybe it's a small hatchback, maybe it's a small 2-door convertible, whatever it is, or a classic car, something you just don't need a ton of speakers or a ton of output for. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still get a lot of output out of a 300 watt 4-channel amp. So if you were to use, say, an ACM 4.300, like you're seeing on your screen right now, you use that and you bridge the rear channels, you now have a awesome little 2.1 system in whatever this small car is. Again, let's call it a Miata for right now. So if you have the ability to run those front channels at 4 ohm, you're going to get 50 watts by 2, and then we're going to get some great bridged power to those rear channels in bridged mono. So you're going to have an awesome little system that is, again, all built on something that's not much bigger than like an iPhone. And you're doing that all with an ACM 4.300. That amplifier retails right around the $300, $330 price range. So not an expensive amp to get something with audio control quality, audio control warranty, awesome sound quality, and build yourself a nice little system. Maybe a pair of components in the front doors and a single 8 or 10-inch sub off that bridged rear channel. That's going to be honestly more than enough for a lot of consumers out there. And if space is tight, you could even fit that amplifier a lot of times inside of the dashboard or inside of, under the dash or in a kick panel or something if it's a really small vehicle. So that's just one example of how we can kind of get away with that in those tiny vehicles. The next option would be to step up to like a full-size 4-channel amp. So let's say we move to something like a LC. Say we move to something like an LC 4.800. So still physically not a big amplifier. You know, I mean, this isn't huge. This is still going to be able to fit under maybe a front seat in a lot of vehicles or, tucked up under the package tray or something like that. But using the 4-channel amplifiers, we have 2 options from AudioControl. You've got the LC 4.800 or the D 4.800. Now, power on these is both going to be the same. It's just a variation of whether you want DSP or whether you want traditional controls. So in an LC 4.800, you're going to have a traditional setup. So you're going to have your dials and controls and switches on the front. Rather than having DSP software to control everything, you're going to have it all on the product itself. So for those of you that aren't into DSP or you're not interested in using software, or maybe the budget just doesn't allow for it, LC amplifiers are great. They still offer that same amount of power, that same versatility. They have built-in signal summing, all that great stuff. it's just going to use traditional controls on the front panel there. And it does come with that nice cover panel you saw me take off, so you can hide all of those controls and everything as well, which is nice. Keeps prying fingers out of there. Maybe it even, I don't know, keeps the customer out of there sometimes in certain situations, but it'll definitely keep, you know, some debris and dust and dirt from there, and, you know, keep your friend who knows about stereos from adjusting that amplifier. So with the LC and the D 4.800, there's a couple of different ways to go about this. Power wise on these, I should mention, you got some awesome power on the LC and D series. These are 125 watts by 4, or you've got 200 watts by 4 at 2 ohm. And then you've got 400 watts by 1 at 4 ohm bridged. So depending on how you set up this amplifier, if you set it up the way you see on your screen right now, 2 front speakers and a sub, if those front speakers are at 4 ohm, let's say the whole system's at 4 ohm, you're going to have 125 by 2 plus 400 by 1 on that sub. That's a lot of power. I mean, that's more than enough, again, for most systems out there. Now, remember, just because you run that sub at 4 ohm, you can also run those front channels at 2 ohm if you want to. If you're running it in stereo, you can run it in 2 ohm. So you've got a few different scenarios there. We could run 4 speakers off those front channels, 4 4 ohm speakers, drag it down to 2 ohm and get 200 watts by 2. So now each of those 4 front speakers is getting 100 watts RMS. That is a ton of power for mids and highs, coaxials, components. Most speakers out there, 100 watts per channel is going to be more than enough. I mean, there's not even a lot of speakers out there that'll handle that, truthfully. And then, you know, you've got that 400 watts for the sub. If you have 2 single 2 ohm woofers, you could even run those rear channels as stereo and get 200 watts per woofer if you'd like to do it that way. So there's a number of different configurations with these 4-channel amplifiers to get a lot of power out of these things. And again, do a great sounding system in a small to mid-size car off of a single amplifier that's not that big. You know, here's my iPhone, for example, in comparison to the size of that amp. Not that big. So you can really fit that thing in a lot of spaces. Now, remember too, if you're using like our D series 4-channel here, you have the option of using our ACR3 controller. Let me back up so you guys can see that again. The ACR3 controller will allow you to do DSP preset. So you can select one of 4 presets that you've already designated in the software. And then you also have the ability to use that ACR3 as a master volume and or a sub control. So if you did designate, say, the rear couple of channels, if we were using the D series, say you designate the rear channels as sub, you would be able to control just the level of those rear channels using that ACR3. Now, if you're using the LC series amplifier, this is going to use the ACR1. The ACR1 is just a potentiometer. The ACR3 is a push and turn. So it's a rotary encoder. So it can actually do 2 different modes, push to select and turn to select. So a little bit different there. So if you're using the LC series, you're going to use an ACR1. And with that, again, on the settings on this amplifier itself, you're going to be able to designate what you want that ACR1 to control, if we're going to have it control those rear channels for sub or not. So pretty cool way to do things. Stepping up to 5-channel amps. I know some of you watching this maybe haven't seen them, maybe haven't heard of them, but yes, AudioControl released 5-channel amplifiers. We are super excited about those. The 5-channel amps have been 5-channel amps have been shipping for a little while now, and they are doing extremely, extremely well. Yes, one of the questions coming across Facebook there on the 4-channel amps, if you bridge the 4-channel amplifiers, any of our 4-channel or multi-channel amplifiers, I should say, not just the 4-channel, the 4-channel, the 5-channel, the 6-channel we're going to talk about. If you do bridged on any of our amplifiers, that is a 4 ohm minimum impedance. If you're running it in stereo, you can go down to 2 ohm impedance. So great question, Kevin. Thank you. So speaking of the 5-channel amplifiers, we offer these just like our others in a LC or a D series. The LC series, for those of you not familiar, LC series is always going to be our kind of go-to standard amplifier. And by standard, I mean it's going to have physical dials and controls on it. If you look at the D series that's on your screen right now, everything in the D series uses DSP software. So anything from our D series of products is not going to have physical controls and dials on it. Instead, it's going to use our DM Smart DSP software. And we'll dive into that a little bit here in a minute. So speaking of 5-channel amplifiers, we offer 2 models. These just started shipping within the last couple of months, so this may still be new for some of you. The LC 5.1300 is definitely a go-to 5-channel, I think, for a lot of shops right now. This is 1,300 watts RMS 5-channel amplifier. It's literally everything you need to build probably 90% of the systems out there being installed in cars today. So the LC 5.1300 specs wise, we have some awesome power. We've got 100 watts by 4 plus 300 by 1 at 4 ohm, or you've got 200 by 4 plus 500 by 1 at 2 ohm. So again, lots of power. Now that amp is also bridgeable. So if you want to run the 2 front channels in stereo, the 2 rear channels bridged, plus the 5th channel, you could certainly do that. You could bridge all of the front 4 channels and have yourself a 3-channel amplifier. There's a number of different configurations you could do with these 5-channel amps. There's a lot that you can do with them. The key thing with the LC5 is that we really wanted to simplify that one and make it something that anybody could grab off the shelf, get into a car, and make that car sound great right away. So we made sure that the crossover section on the LC5 is simplified. Everything is pretty much set out of the box for the most part, and it's going to be really easy to dial in. Now, we even go so far as when we engineer these products, our industrial design and our engineering team go so far as to make sure that even the layout of the controls is kind of in a workflow. So when you look at an LC5 1300, as you go through those controls, they actually make sense. It's like, okay, most people set up the crossovers first, then they're going to go in and set up the gain and this, that, and the other. That's exactly how the controls are laid out for each set of channels. So you kind of just work your way from left to right on the amplifier. By the time you get to the end, you're dialed in and ready to go. With the LC 5-channel, this also has signal summing built in. Even though it's a 5-channel amplifier, it has 8 channels of high-level input. So again, if you're keeping your factory radio in a system, you don't need extra parts. You don't need an LC7i. You don't need an LC6i. You don't need an LC2i. You don't need an LC product. That's why these are LC amplifiers, because it's built in. If you've got a system that has factory components in the front or discretely amplified factory system, yes, this will even take input in from a factory amplified sound system. So if you do have one of those cars that came with a factory premium sound where it has an amplifier in the trunk or behind a panel or whatever, you can take the signal from that factory amplified system, send it straight into an LC amplifier. These amplifiers can deal with that high level signal, convert it into something usable, and give you great sound on the output side. Now, if you're sending signals in that are separately amplified and crossed over by the factory, what I mean by that is if you have a vehicle where the front has tweeters up in the dash or mid tweets up in the dash and then lows down in the doors, those are probably being sent amplified crossed over signals. So highs are only being sent to the dash, lows are being sent to the door, something like that. Well, normally you would need to get an external device to sum those together. With these amplifiers, these LC series can do all of that signal summing internally. So you can take that high signal and that low signal, mash that together inside the amplifier and get full range sound. And now you can send it out to whatever you want. Components, coaxes, out to woofers, whatever it is that you're doing, you can do all that signal processing inside here, even though it's not a DSP. So you really still have a ton of control. Now with the LC5, the other cool thing is if you use our ACR1 dash control knob, as soon as you plug in an ACR1 to this amplifier, it is designed to only control the 5th channel, the sub channel. So you don't have the opportunity with an LC5 to control all of the channels with the ACR1 knob or anything like that, because it's really not necessary in 99% of the situations. So we tried to kind of focus this amplifier a little bit and just make it easier. So some examples for you on kind of how this could be set up and what that could look like. I'll dive into those in a second. I also wanted to show you just the D5 1300. Like I mentioned, the D and the LC are literally the same amplifier as far as power and all that stuff. The chassis size is exactly the same. It's just down to power, or excuse me, down to features as far as DSP versus non-DSP. So power in the D5 1300 is exactly the same. You've got 100 by 4 plus 300 by 1 or 200 by 4 plus 500 by 1 at 2 ohms. So lots of control, lots of power. 1300 watts RMS is a ton. And do yourself a favor, go on YouTube, look up the LC 5.1300, watch some of those review videos that are out there, and you'll see that we even are are probably underrating this one by quite a bit. Some testers have gotten some incredible power out of that 5th channel. So check those out if you get a chance. So with the DSP version, the D5.1300, this is really the ultimate system building amplifier. You want to talk about putting in 1 amp today and making an awesome system, but still being able to build on it later. The D5, there's nothing else like it. So this is 1300 watts, 5-channel amplifier, full DSP built in, all your high to low level conversion, all of your signal summing, everything is inside there. EQ, crossover, time correction, AccuBase, you name it, it's inside the D5.1300. Now, to make this an even better value, though, to make this something that everybody could get in their car today, but then still add on to later, it also has a set of RCA outputs. Now, those RCA outputs are not a pass-through. Those RCA outputs are a DSP-able RCA out. So think of it like this. The DSP has 8 channels of high-level input, 6 channels of low-level input. On the output side of the DSP that's inside this amp, you have 5 channels of amplified output plus 2 channels of non-amplified. So really, it's like an 8 in, 7 out DSP if you want to get down to the nitty gritty of it. Now, those two extra DSP channels are non-amplified. They're an RCA out. But the coolest thing about that is that they're not, like I said, they're not a pass-through. Those are designed to be able to be fully controlled by the DSP. So if you want to put in a D5.1300 today, have an awesome sounding 1300 watt driven 5-channel system, fronts, rears, sub, all off 1 amp, great, you're ready to roll. Now, if you want to, I don't know, maybe a couple months down the line, you've been bitten by the car audio bug and you're ready to upgrade. You want to add a bigger sub amp. You want to go active on those front channels. You want to take your 2-way components and turn them into 3-way components or whatever it is. Awesome. Use the D5.1300 because you're going to be able to use those RCA outputs to add a little 2-channel amplifier, maybe a ACM 2.300, and go active on those front channels, or turn that 2-way into a 3-way. Or maybe you want to go to big bass now. Maybe the 500 watts built into this isn't enough anymore. You want to add 2 more woofers or whatever. Cool. Use those RCA outputs to add a 1500 watt sub amp. And now you've got everything driven off of 1 DSP, 1 software, 1 control is all there, but you can do it all from this amplifier. It's really pretty special. Now, if you plug an ACR3, which is our dash control knob, like our bass knob that plugs into this amplifier, not only can you control the 5th channel built into this, you could control the other 4 main channels built into this amplifier. So you can have a master volume or a sub control volume or both in that bass knob. You can also select your DSP presets, but you can also use that controller to control the output of those 2 extra RCA outs. So like I mentioned, if you do go back in later down the road and add an additional sub amp, you could use the D5.1300 to control the output of that auxiliary sub amp. That extra sub amp could be controlled all from 1 controller, 1 piece of software. It's really pretty cool. Now, I mentioned the software a little bit. DM Smart DSP is what we use to control all of our DSP-based products. So anything from AudioControl that starts with the letter D basically means it has a DSP built in, which means it's going to be controlled by DM Smart DSP. Now, DM Smart DSP is some of the easiest to use, easiest to learn DSP software in the market. Now, I know every brand probably kind of tries to say that their stuff is simple to use, it's easy to figure out. But this is actually really easy to figure out, not just because I work here, but because I've actually worked with most of the DSPs out there. And this is truthfully one of the easiest ones to dive into. Now, we never go out and claim that, you know, we have the world's best DSP and we have the world's best software and this, that, and the other. What we do claim is that our DSPs are easy to use. Most people can figure them out, and they're going to give you the majority of the features you need to make every system sound great. Now, there's always going to be somebody out there claiming a bigger DSP, a higher end DSP with more features and this, that, and the other. Fine. You know, we're working on stuff too, but just keep in mind that for the majority of the systems that are put in today, this is going to have everything you need to do it. And the beauty of it is, you know, when I go around the country and I do trainings in stores, I go around to stereo shops and I do trainings for them and I teach them this software. What it boils down to is that if you can't get a car set up, dialed in, tuned, EQ'd, time corrected, crossed over, get all that stuff done in about 20 or 30 minutes, you're spending too much time on DSP. If these are production vehicles that are for average consumers going out the door, 20 to 30 minutes is about all it should take to dial in that car. You know, if it's taking longer than that, you've either got a really weird car that's really a pain in the butt and it's advanced, or something's wrong. You know, the software is too difficult, you don't know what you're doing, or something's wired incorrectly. That's really what it boils down to. Because remember, with most of these vehicles, we're not winning IASCA World Finals here. We're just trying to make the car sound really, really good, blow people's expectations away, and make it sound awesome and make them happy with how it sounds. That's what this is all about, right? That's what car sound is all about, is the emotion, the enjoyability of driving a car with an awesome sound system. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to, you know, not every car anyway is trying to achieve a perfectly flat RTA score. Most consumers don't even know what that means. They just want their car to sound good. This software can make you, or can help you make their car sound good quickly. That's what it's all about. So we have other trainings on just DM Smart DSP. If you want to go dive deeper into that, you want to learn more about it, I've done whole hours before on just the DSP software. You can find those on our YouTube channel. We have all of our previous trainings uploaded on there. So if you are using one of these cool new DSP amplifiers and you wanted to set this up just as a traditional single amp system, okay, great. That's on your screen right now. That this is basically an example of what probably 90% of the guys out there who are going to put in an LC 5.1300 or a D 5.1300. This is probably 90% of the time how it's going to be set up. You're going to put in 4 coaxials or components and coaxials mix. You're going to run them at probably 80 or 90 hertz and up. And then you're going to put in a single woofer running at 80 to 90 hertz and down. And that's it. Single system, piece of cake, plug in an ACR1. You've got a bass control or sub control, bass knob, whatever you want to call it. Easy as could be. Now, if you want to do things a little bit differently, maybe the system's a little more advanced, maybe it's a smaller car, maybe we're nixing the rear speakers. A lot of installers, a lot of car audio guys hate rear speakers because of imaging and soundstage and all that. So maybe you've convinced your customer, or you as the consumer have decided, you know what, I don't need rear speakers. I drive a Honda Civic 2-door. I don't need the rears. They're a waste of time. They don't sound good anyway. I'm going to put all my focus and energy and attention on the front stage. That's a very popular choice, and for good reason. So if you were going to set up this amplifier in that method, okay, no big deal. We can run just the front tweeters off of channels 1 and 2. We can run the front mid-bass drivers off channels 3 and 4, and then run the sub off channel 5. So now you've got a full system. It's an active system. So at that point, the crossovers that came with those component speakers are not going to be used. If you're putting in some 6.5 and tweeter component setup, you are going to take the crossover that came with that kit and leave it in the box. You are not going to use it in this scenario. So this is going to give you the most control, the most power, and the most dynamic system you can in that scenario. Passive crossovers are okay. You know, they're fine to use. They make life simple, and sometimes they're a necessary evil. I shouldn't even say evil, because there's nothing wrong with passive crossovers, but going active certainly allows you more flexibility. I mean, now you have precise control over those tweeters or high frequency drivers over those mid-range drivers. If you use a passive crossover, you can really only adjust those together, right? Because you're sending one signal to that crossover and it's separating it to mids and highs. If we have 2 channels designated just for tweeters, 2 channels designated just for mids, I have supreme control at that point over what I want to do with those mid-range and tweeters. If I like a heavy mid-bass system and a little softer sound, I can bring those tweeters down a little bit and bump up those mid-basses a little bit. So there's a lot of opportunity to really customize your sound when you're going active in a system like that. So this is another pretty traditional setup with that one. One of my other favorite things to do with the 5-channel amplifiers is doing kind of a head unitless system or a Bluetooth standalone setup. You know, we do get asked sometimes, well, why don't you guys offer a Bluetooth amplifier? Now, we purposely have not put Bluetooth inside the amplifiers just to try to help keep costs down for the guys that don't need it. There's lots of systems where, hey, the factory head unit has Bluetooth. I don't want 2 Bluetooth chips in my car. That's going to be confusing. I don't want to pair to the wrong one or have my wife or significant other, you know, pair to the wrong Bluetooth. So having a standalone Bluetooth makes a lot of sense. And so that's why we came out with the ACX BT1. The BT1's a really cool piece. We'll talk about that in a second here, but this would be a really popular system as well. If you're doing maybe a classic car, something where you're not going to put in a traditional aftermarket head unit. You know, they make those aftermarket head units that kind of look old, but are actually new. You know, to each their own. But me personally, if I have that 64 Impala and it still has that original 64 Impala radio in the dash, I'm leaving that thing. I'm not touching it. I want to leave that in there just for aesthetics. And what I would do is do something like this. This way, you've got a 5-channel amplifier. You've got Bluetooth fed straight into the amp, and you've got volume from your phone, volume up and down on your phone, and you've got a bass knob plugged in to control the woofer. You're set. I mean, this is what most people would be more than happy to have in their classic car. And really with those classic car guys too, a lot of them don't want radio. They don't want all of the features and BS that comes along with a standard singled in. You know, it used to be really popular to hide a singled in radio in the glove box or put one under the seat and use a remote or whatever. And now it's like, you know, I don't really need all that stuff. Really, all I want to do is hop in my classic car on a Sunday. I want to go for a cruise and I want to play music from my phone or my iPod. Okay, well, what do they need to do that? Probably just Bluetooth and a nice amplifier with some nice speakers. And you could even do a fully hidden system in this case, because our Bluetooth controller does not require that you access it to pair. There's no buttons on it, so you don't have to get to it. And then with the amplifier, you know, in a classic car, you could probably hide it under a seat or something, and then conceal the speakers as best you can. And you're set, man. You've got a fully concealed, great sounding standalone system where you didn't have to modify their dash. You didn't have to access anything. Now, this could also work in the scenario of, you know, maybe a newer vehicle where it has a more advanced factory sound system, but you're trying to simplify it. This happens all the time. Techs or consumers or whoever are working on this vehicle and they find out that the factory radio or factory system has some stuff that they don't like. They don't like the factory time delay. They don't like the factory all pass filters. They don't like the factory EQ curve. They don't like all that stuff. And maybe they don't want to fight those things in a DSP. So what they'll do in a lot of those systems is they'll take high level from those systems, feed it into the amplifier, but then they'll also take one of our standalone Bluetooth pieces and feed it into that amplifier as well. And then they'll use the standalone ACX BT1 to feed Bluetooth in, so they can turn off the factory system, turn on that BT1 and pair their phone straight to that. And when they want to listen to music, they're just streaming straight into the amplifier. They're forgetting about the factory sound system and they're playing everything that way. If they're going to do a, if they're going to use that factory head unit, maybe for AM radio or listen to, talk radio that day on their way to work, they can just leave the phone unpaired from Bluetooth and then play that radio, and it's going to come through the system just fine. Now, it's even easier if you have the D version, if you have the D 5.1300, because now you can use the ACR3 to actually switch sources rather than having to turn one on and one off. That's not the greatest way, but it would work. So a couple of different variations there. One of the other things we're going to talk about is 6-channel amplifiers, the LC and D 6.1200. So these are 1200 watts RMS, 6-channel amplifiers. These offer probably some of the most versatility of any amplifier out there. The LC 6.12 and D 6.12 have become super, super popular, and for good reason. There's really not a lot that you can't do with these, especially if you're building a system that maybe the budget doesn't allow for a DSP, or maybe the tech isn't comfortable with DSP yet. So you're going to lean more towards the LC series amplifier. That's fine. That LC 6.1200 is literally one of the most versatile, unique amplifiers I've ever come across. Because not only do you have 1200 watts, 6 channels, but it is ultimately configurable. So you can run it as a 5-channel if you want to. You can run it as a 3-channel. You can run it any which way you'd like. So 6, 5, or 3 channels, you can run that as. So it is bridgeable on all 3 sets. Now, the other cool thing with those amplifiers is that they are very versatile with the ACR1 controller. You can plug in an ACR1 control to an LC 6.1200 and have yourself a master volume, or have a bass control for bridged channels 5 and 6, or however you want to configure this thing. So what's really popular with those 6-channel amplifiers is to start out as running it as a 5-channel. So they'll put in an LC 612, they'll run, the 4 doors off the front 4 channels, and they'll bridge channels 5 and 6 to a single woofer. Now, remember, when it's bridged, we need to stay at 4 ohms. And when you're 4 ohms bridged on those amplifiers, though, you're going to get a solid 400 watts at 4 ohms bridged. The 6-channel amplifiers, in case you're curious, are 125 watts by 6 at 4 ohm, or 200 watts by 6 at 2 ohm. And then, like I mentioned a second ago, 400 watts by 1 bridged. So if you wanted to run the LC612 all channels bridged, you could have 3 by 400 watts. So totally up to you how you want to configure those things. But let's talk about using these as a single amp system. If we're bringing in a 6-channel amplifier and we're going to run it as a 5, there's an example of that on your screen right now. It's really easy to do. We bridge those rear or last channels, channels 5 and 6. We plug in an ACR1. We set the dip switches so that we can control channels 5 and 6 from that dash controller. And now we have a 5-channel amplifier that's all ready to go. Now, one of the other neat things on the LC 6.12 is, like I mentioned earlier, all of our amplifiers have an LOC built in. So if you're using your LC 61200 as your line output converter as well, you're using it to do your signal summing, you're using it to do all your signal routing and processing, let's call it, that's fine. You can dump all of your signals in there, do your signal summing, do all of that stuff to make the system sound great and achieve full range. And then if down the road, you've set this up as a 5-channel for right now, but down the road you decide, you know what, I do want more bass. This 400 watts on the single 10, it's just not cutting it anymore. Great, no problem. The LC6 and the D61200 have a pair of RCA outputs. Now, remember, these are not a pass-through. These are in the D61200, a DSP RCA output. In the LC61200, they are a result of all the signal summing you've done. So if you've brought in a high, mid, and low channel, or a high and a low channel, summed those together, that RCA output is going to be the result of that signal summing, which is really cool. So you don't have to worry about getting a funky signal sent out to that new sub amp you want to add on. You've already done all that summing and processing in the amp already. It's a piece of cake to add on an additional amplifier. So again, as far as system building and doing things like that, these make a whole lot of sense when you want to put them in as a 5-channel to begin with, and then later on, take that 6-channel, convert it back to a 6, add yourself a separate mono sub amp, and now you've got a true 6.1 system at that point, or however you want to configure it. So it's great for doing, components in the front, coaxes in the back, and a sub. And then when you want to go to a 2 or 3 sub system, you add yourself an LC1800 or LC1500 sub amp. And now we use that 6-channel amplifier to do active front stage components and really up your game, really give you more control and more flexibility. So when I mentioned earlier that these amplifiers were super flexible and versatile, this is what I'm talking about. You're never, locked down with our amps as far as, oh, I bought a 6-channel, I can only use it as a mids and highs amp, or I can only use it for now as a 5-channel. When I upgrade, I'll have to get rid of it later. That is not the case. That's the beauty of our amplifiers, is really, you never have to. You can take these amps and reconfigure them to run a different part of the system, but keep them in that system. There's no real reason that you have to get rid of it or change it that dramatically. So it's pretty cool the way we've done that. Now, also with the 6-channel amplifiers, like I mentioned before, maybe you've now added a sub amp, or you just want to do a awesome 3-way front stage. Maybe it's a small car. A lot of these smaller cars are coming with big mid bass drivers in the front or under the front seats. So if you have a car that has maybe a 7 or 8 inch mid bass driver plus 4-inch mid range plus 1-inch tweeters up in the top dash, you could easily take an LC612, run that whole system, or D612, and run that whole system active off one of these amplifiers, have way more control, really dial in all those fine details, and have an awesome sounding full range system. Now, at that point, we don't have a woofer, but again, not every customer is going to want a subwoofer, or maybe they don't have the space or currently the budget for a woofer. That's okay. Let's get them started with an LC612, make that full range system sound as good as we can, and you can get some pretty decent bass out of a pair of 8s in the door with some power on it. Now, when they want to upgrade and go to some real bass, now we have those RCA outputs to add an additional amplifier, or even just bridge these rear channels, the channels 5 and 6, and put in a single 8 or 10-inch woofer or something like that in the trunk or in the hatchback, and really have a full-blown system. And you've kept the same amp. Again, they didn't have to come back and buy a whole bunch more components. Today is all about single amp systems. These amplifiers are the ultimate way to go for doing single amp systems. So I had also mentioned that ACX BT1 as being an awesome option when doing some of these amplifiers. This is an example of that exact thing. You know, whether it's a D612 or LC612 amplifier, you have the opportunity to add an ACX BT1. Now, the BT1 is our standalone Bluetooth streamer. I'll dig into some details on that in just a moment here. But really what that's going to allow you to do is, again, have a full range, maybe 6-channel, or if you run it as a 5-channel, whatever, sound system that's all ran off of a single Bluetooth controller. Now, this is going to make it so that when using the 6-channel amplifiers, you'll have the choice. With the ACR1 dash control knob, when you plug that in, you're going to have the opportunity to either run that as a full range master volume control, or you can designate that as a sub control. So if you have a customer who's not okay with using their smartphone to do volume, maybe they don't want to do volume up and down on the smartphone, that's okay. You can plug in an ACR1 to an LC612 and run it as a master volume. No big deal. So if they want a physical volume knob, but they still don't want a head unit, we can do that. No problem. If they are okay with running volume from their smartphone, but they still want to do no head unit, but they'd rather have a bass knob, no problem. You can designate which one it is in an LC612. In a D61200, not only can you designate which one it is, but you can have both, because that uses the ACR3. The ACR3 is going to allow you to do maybe one preset where the knob is a bass knob and another preset where the knob is a master volume. So again, super, super flexible. Just ultimate versatility as far as what you can do with these. Like I mentioned earlier, there's not much you can't do. So I've talked about a couple of times throughout this training about the ACX BT1. For those of you that aren't familiar, maybe you're like, what's that thing? I've never heard of that. Is that new? It is relatively new. We brought that out, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ago now. This was released. And the BT1 is just a really simple Bluetooth streamer, but like everything AudioControl, it's a high quality Bluetooth streamer. We didn't want to bring out just another Bluetooth streamer into the market. We wanted to do it the AudioControl way. We wanted to bring out a Bluetooth streamer with that little bit of AudioControl special sauce sprinkled on there. So the cool thing about the BT1, as we're wrapping things up here today, we're running out of time. It is IPX5 rated. So this can take some splashes. This can handle the all weather situations. If you want to put it in a boat or a side-by-side or a Jeep or whatever, the ACX BT1 is great for that. Along those same lines, it's a simple, clean design, but not only is it simple and clean, it has no buttons on it. Okay. So there's nothing worse than putting in a Bluetooth dongle or Bluetooth controller, Bluetooth receiver, whatever you want to call it. There's nothing worse than putting in a Bluetooth piece and then having to get to it later when your customer gets a new phone or when you get a new phone because you buried the thing up under the dash thinking, I'll never have to get to this again. With the ACX BT1, you won't ever have to get to it again because there's no buttons on it. There's no switches. There's no buttons. There's no dials. There's nothing on there. Okay. So there's no reason that you have to ever get to it. You can hide it up inside the dash. You can double stick it to the side of the amplifier if you're doing it at the amp or whatever it is. It's also aptX HD compatible. So if you do use a smartphone that's aptX capable, you're going to get a high res Bluetooth streaming experience. So you get a little bit higher resolution than average Bluetooth. Speaking of Bluetooth, it is Bluetooth the version 4.1. 4.1 is going to make sure that you get a super fast connection. So even the very first time you power it up and take it out of the box, power it up and pair up your phone for that first initial connection, it's super, super quick. And then after that, every time you go to repair to it, next time you pull out the boat or next time you hop in your vehicle, that Bluetooth 4.1 is really quick at reconnecting recently paired or previously paired connections. It works really, really well. It's also a universal piece. It is RCA output, so it can be used with anything with RCAs. Even if you just have a head unit that doesn't have Bluetooth but came with an aux in, you could certainly use an adapter and make your factory head unit Bluetooth capable just by adding this piece. It's really pretty cool. One of my favorite things about the BT1 is that as a remote output. So let's say you were doing a standalone system. Maybe we're using like the ACX 300.4, doing something like this, and we want to run it standalone. No problem. The only issue with that normally would be, if you're going to put this into, say, a real small boat, little 14-foot boat, you're putting this in, it's running 4 speakers, and you're going to put in the ACX BT1. in normal situations, you would have to put in some sort of switched power lead or a switch, toggle switch, rocker switch somewhere to turn everything on. The great thing about the ACX BT1 is that it will turn on the amplifier for you. So how it actually works is you're going to take the BT1, you're going to connect RCA output to the inputs of the amplifier. You're going to get power and ground from the same spot the amplifier gets its power and ground. And then the remote out from the BT1 is going to go to the remote in on the ACX amplifier. Now, at that point, what's going to happen is you're going to pair up your phone to the ACX BT1, and the unit is kind of in like standby, more or less. It's not fully on. It's just powered up enough to make that initial Bluetooth connection. Once you're paired up to that, and you're ready to go, as soon as you find that favorite song or fire up that favorite playlist for the lake, hit play. And as soon as you hit play, it now tells the amplifier to turn on. It's got an instant turn on circuit that'll fire up that amplifier. And depending on how fast your amplifier can turn on, within a second or so, you're going to have sound. Now, the really cool part is when there's silence, when you stop playing music, it's going to wait about 6 or 7 seconds to power down that turn on circuit. So you're not going to have your amplifier turning off in between every song and then starting back up as each song starts. It's got a nice delay built in there, and it works exceptionally well. It's super smooth. So if you've never heard of an ACX BT1 and you were wondering what I was talking about, what that thing is, that's what that thing is. Those are shipping now. A lot of retailers already have those in stock on their shelves. So keep an eye out for one of those if you're looking for a nice Bluetooth piece. One of my favorite systems that I will cover, and then I'll answer some questions and we'll wrap things up here, is a head unitless system completely. Now, this is my go-to, my favorite system to do in like a classic car or really any vehicle where they just don't want a head unit, but they still want some physical controls. So I've got a little classic Datsun pickup I'm restoring, and this is my plan for that truck, is to do ACX BT1 into a matrix. Now, we use the matrix as a line driver, but we also use the matrix to supply RCA preamp signal to all of the inputs of the amplifier. So if you were using a separate 2-channel, 4-channel, 1-channel amp for all your speakers, whatever your configuration is, the matrix is going to make sure that you have a nice hot preamp output signal to go to those amplifiers. It's also going to make sure you don't have to use any Y adapters or anything like that. Now, Y adapters would never be an issue with our amplifiers because our amps have a switch on them to eliminate that anyway. But if for some reason you're using some other brand's amplifiers, the matrix will make sure you have all those RCA outs you need. So back to this setup, ACX BT1 into the matrix, out of the matrix, into your amplifier. 2 ACR1 control knobs, 1 plugged into the amplifier and 1 plugged into the matrix. The 1 plugged into the amplifier is acting as just a sub-control. The 1 plugged into the matrix is acting as a master volume, controlling all of the outputs equally. So it's a really cool setup. At the end of the day, what you have is a system with 2 knobs in the dash. Remember, a lot of classic cars used to have those big 2-knob radios. You could even put these knobs in those spaces if you wanted to and kind of, make them look like those classic knobs. What a cool setup. You've now got a master volume and a bass control, and then you're running everything else from your smartphone. I don't know what more you need in most classic vehicles, right? And if you wanted to go above and beyond that, great. Use a DSP amp instead, and now you've got full EQ and time alignment and crossover and all that stuff. But for most basic, like I said, my little classic truck I'm restoring, I don't need all that stuff in mind. I just want the very basics for when I take it out and cruise it on a Sunday or something. This would give me everything I need, more than enough power, be a pretty awesome little setup. So let's answer a couple of the questions that have come through here. Let's see, RCA output. Yeah, so when you're talking the RCA output on that DSP, I saw a couple of questions come up there. On both the DSP amplifiers, on all of the DSP amps, the D4.800, the D6.1200, and the new D5.1300, they all have an extra RCA out. Let's see, I've got a D4.800 right here. I'll show you. So on this amplifier, here, I'll actually even... let's do this, and let's switch cameras real quick here. So when you look at the output side of this amplifier, there are, on the RCA side of this amplifier, there's 6 of them here. You'll notice that there's 2 that are line in, front and rear, but there's also a set of line out. Now, those line out RCAs are going to be for that DSP output. So if you are putting in something like a D4.800 or you're putting in a D6.1200 or D5, they all have that line out. Now, this is not to be confused with a pass-through. It's not an RCA pass-through. It is a true line output. So that line output is awesome for adding on, an additional amplifier, or adding a little 2-channel to go active, or adding a big sub amp if you decide that you want to, get some big bass in there because the setup you have now isn't enough or something like that. Now, one other thing to mention though is that RCA output is also found on a lot of the LC series amplifiers. So if you're looking at something like, say, a LC 4.800, I'll switch cameras again and I'll show you kind of the same thing. When we look at the LC 4.800, you'll notice the same. We've got a set of line outputs as well as my line level ins for front and rear. But those line outs are really what we're talking about here, because if we are using our high level inputs to do all of our input summing and do everything there, so we're using those line level inputs as my high to low converter, but we're also using the internal stuff in here to do my signal summing. Now I've got a set of line level outs to go to an additional amplifier. So a really, really popular system. I know we're talking single amp systems here today, but looking towards the future, say you put in an LC 4.800 today. You bring in all your high level signals, you do all of your line level conversion, you do your signal summing internally, you're ready to go, and you run it as a 2.1 for now. So we run from some nice front speakers or front and rears with no fade, and we bridge the rear channels to a sub. Great, we're happy for now. Now, in the future, when we decide we want to go bigger, we want to do active fronts or 2-way or 3-way conversion, or we want to go bigger sub amp, we can use those line level outputs on that LC 4800 to add an LC 1800, and you've got now a 1600 watt 5-channel system, and both of the amplifiers are the same size. So I know we're talking single amp systems today, but somebody did ask the question there. That was a super, super popular combo, either running the D 4.800 or LC 4.800, and then using an LC 1800 as the sub amp. By far one of the best 5-channel systems money can buy as far as features and value and all that good stuff. So let's see here. Let me cruise through the questions here real quick to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, somebody asked, does the BT1 have phone call capabilities? It does not. It is just a Bluetooth streaming device. I suppose if you got a call, it would handle the phone call audio, but you would be using the microphone built into your phone at that point. So probably not ideal if you're looking for something for phone calls, but maybe in a classic car or a boat or something, it could be used in a pinch, I suppose, if you wanted to, but really not what it was designed for. It's really just designed to be a standalone music streaming device. Let me see here, cruise through these questions real quick, make sure I'm not missing anything. I think I've caught pretty much everything there. And just check the chat real quick. Nope, looks like we're all good. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join me today. I know we ran a little bit over time, so thanks for sticking around. All of you on Facebook Live, thanks for joining me. I tried to get to all of your questions, so thanks so much for interacting today. We're going to continue to do these, every month is the plan. This is April's monthly web training single amp systems. Feel free to shoot me a message, shoot me an email, shoot me a Facebook message or something. If there's a topic that I haven't covered and you'd love to see me cover, something you want me to go more in depth on, or something you want Chris and I to do, yeah, shoot me a message. Let me know. I'd love to take your suggestions and do these trainings on what you guys want to see. So with that, I'm Matthew Palumbo with AudioControl. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.